Whether you're a beginner driver or an advanced driver, whether you've got a big budget or a small budget, stay tuned to find out which car we think is the right track car for you. Alright everybody, if you're a subscriber of our channel, then you know that we like track tests, and we've done a lot of them here. I think we've got something like 88 different track tests in our playlist of track reviews, as we call them. So we've spent a lot of time at our local road course here, Toronto Motorsports Park, playing around with our own cars and with lots of the cars that belong to our friends and fans, and it's given us a bit of a unique perspective on what we think might be the best track car for just about any kind of driver, whether you're a beginner or whether you've been going to the track for 20 years like Pete and I have, and whether you're on a really tight budget or whether you've got, let's call it an unlimited budget. So why don't we start at the most modest end of that and have a chat about what we think is the best beginner car for somebody who's on a relatively tight budget. Of course, you could go out and buy yourself like a $500 car and just throw some decent tires on it and rip around in it, and that's not a bad option. You really can learn a lot and have a lot of fun with that kind of approach, but we're gonna go a little deeper than that. We're gonna look at like what we would consider a properly prepared track car that we think is gonna be really friendly for a beginner to get their toes wet at the racetrack in. And for that, I'm gonna maybe show my Honda bias by going with the Golden Era stuff, the EG, EK, DC2 Hondas, either the Civics or the Integras. And really there's a wide variety of reasons why I would recommend that for a beginner who's looking to build a track car on a budget, and that's because A, they're widely available, they're pretty cheap to buy even with a B-swap or a K-swap in them. There's a huge amount of aftermarket support for them, and they're just really light on consumables, so they're going to be very forgiving as far as your budget goes with respect to tires and brakes. And being front-wheel drive means that they're not going to try to kill you with oversteer. You can go out on the racetrack and push pretty hard, and when you start to overdrive it, it's going to do something called understeer, meaning the front end of the car is going to lose traction, it's going to start to plow, you're going to lose speed, but you're not going to spin off the track. It's just going to force you to lift off the throttle, to gain traction, to transfer weight onto those front tires, to gain traction back, to let you finish the turn. So it's a really great tool to learn about how to manage slip and traction across the front axle of a car, which you're also having to use for steering. And because you're combining that, power to the ground with steering, it's forcing you to control what you're doing there, and it really is a really good teaching tool as a result of that. So you can also get them with a wide range of power levels, from your basic D series EG or EK, which is only 100 to maybe 125 horsepower, to a B-swapped one, which can get you up in sort of like the 160 to 200 horsepower range, to a K-swapped one where NA you could make anywhere from 200 to 300 horsepower depending on how crazy you go with a motor build. But it gives you a really flexible platform and a really affordable one to start with that you can develop with as a driver and make faster as your skill level grows. So I think it's a really great place to start for anyone who wants to develop as a driver, but also develop as a car technician, as someone who wants to learn how to make their car faster technically as well. So the other car I should throw on the list there though is of course the Mazda Miata. I think it's a fantastic beginner car. It being rear wheel drive does present some different challenges than the front wheel drive Hondas do. It's going to offer you the opportunity to learn about oversteer, or the rear tires losing traction before the front and the back end wanting to slide out. That scares some people, which is why I tend to suggest beginners start with a front wheel drive car. But if you're comfortable with the idea of oversteer and really want to learn about how to control it and maybe even use it to your advantage, you can use oversteer to rotate the car early into a corner, get it pointed in the direction you need to go, and get on the gas sooner. So it can be a really fast way to go around corners if you learn to use it to your advantage. And the nice thing about a Miata is that it's low enough power that you're not going to get yourself in a lot of trouble while you begin to experiment with something like oversteer. So, the NA NB chassis is probably one of the most popular beginner track day cars anywhere in North America because A, they're very affordable. Again, like the Hondas, there's a huge amount of aftermarket and a massive knowledge base about how to make these cars work well at the racetrack. Our NB Miata YouTuber challenge car I think is a pretty good example of what would be a really nice beginner track day car. It's got the safety mods in it with the roll bar and the seat and the harnesses. It's got your basic wheel, tire, brake upgrades, as well as coilovers and sway bars, and that's really all you need to go out in a Miata and be surprisingly fast and learn a lot about how to maintain momentum, because Miatas are classically the definition of a momentum car. Because they're so lightweight and so low powered, you can carry a lot more speed into the corners, and by using as little brake as you possibly can, maintain that momentum through the corners and carrying it out of the corner. So learning about maintaining momentum is a skill that's going to transfer over to any other car you drive, whether it's an all-wheel drive STI or a rear drive Corvette. That skill set will serve you incredibly well as you advance as a driver and maybe start to play around with faster, more powerful cars. So I would say that's where I would start if I was a beginner looking to get into an affordable track day car. Think Civic, Integra, Miata. I think those are pretty common choices for a reason. And if you Google it, you will find one in your neighborhood for sale for cheap. So you're welcome, Internet. Start there. If you're looking for something that's going to challenge you a bit more as a driver, let's call you an advanced driver, then I would recommend stepping up to something like an S2000 or a 350Z. These are still both very budget-friendly cars. The 350Z especially so. It's kind of amazing how affordable 350Zs are these days. And both offer a lot as far as speed potential, but also driver involvement and driver challenge, because unlike the Miata, they're powerful enough that you really can get yourself into trouble with them. You do have to be a more advanced driver, I think, to really get the most out of them and to carry, that kind of speeds that these cars are capable of in the corners. So I would, caution beginners away from these cars if you're really wanting, or if you're a really aggressive driver who you're going to attack corners hard right away. These might not be the right cars for you, but I would say the 350Z is the more beginner-friendly of the two, being that it's a longer wheelbase, you can fit more wheel and tire on it. It has a broader power band with that VQ V6 in it, so it's definitely the more user-friendly of the two, but I would still describe it as a more advanced track day car because it has a lot of speed potential. What if you're a novice driver or a beginner driver who doesn't necessarily want to have a fully prepped track car, or doesn't want to start with an older car like some of the ones I've suggested here? Let's say you want to start with a new car or a close to new car. In that case, I would say there's some really great options out there right now. Stuff like the Veloster N, the Golf GTI or Golf R. You've got WRXs out there as well, which are, I think, quite affordable and very capable at the racetrack. But for me personally, maybe again I'm showing my Honda bias here, but I gotta go with the FK8 Honda Civic Type R. These things are just incredibly trustworthy around the racetrack, and also very, very fast, and yet very low stress to drive at the limit. I can't think of another new car that I've tested at the track recently that made me less anxious when I was pushing it to what I consider to be the absolute limit. The car just felt totally planted, totally trustworthy. It makes a tremendous amount of grip. That 6-speed gearbox is just a joy to drive. It's got a perfect driving position. It's nice and low in the chassis. All the controls are right where you want them to be. It's of course got different driver modes, which can be really helpful to a beginner. I would recommend maybe starting in sport mode when you go to the track in a car like this, because it will keep some of those e-nannies alive and keep you on the track if you make a big judgment error. If my budget was a little tighter, I might look at like a lightly used ND Miata. Similar theme here to the earlier cars. I'm just going with the newer version of the Miata, which is still a tremendous track day car. It is a little faster than the old car, maybe quite a bit faster, but it's still relatively low power. It's not so fast that you're going to get yourself in a lot of trouble, but it does give you all those benefits of a rear-wheel drive platform that's lightweight. You can really toss it into the corners with confidence. It's not going to try to kill you. It will oversteer, but it does it very gradually. The car has a lot of body roll, so it communicates to you a lot with weight transfer, which is a really great way to feel what the car is doing. So it does sort of slow down the action compared to your more traditional higher horsepower rear-wheel drive sports cars. And that's a great way for a beginner to learn to go fast. So similar theme to our beginners in a modified car, I would say with the new cars, you're looking at a Civic Type R or an ND Miata. And if you're a baller, you've got a bit more budget and you want to go faster right out of the box, and you've got, say, more track time under your belt, you're more of an advanced driver, then I would be very tempted to look at the new Supra. I know that's maybe a bit of a controversial choice. There are definitely people out there who've struggled with them at the racetrack, but I think it's an incredibly capable car at the racetrack. We've proven it with the lap times that we've done around TMP, as have a number of other people like Jackie Ding and Chris from Toge, all doing like 118s around that track, which is amazingly quick for a stock car. And the one thing I would caution you with that car though is that it is a lot like an S2000, has a very active rear end, so it will lose traction in the rear rapidly, so you have to really be on your game to catch it. And as I've spent more time tracking that car, I've learned that it doesn't like trail braking, which is an advanced driving technique to get the car to rotate early into a corner by using some brake pressure while you're starting the turn. That'll loosen the rear end up and help it rotate, but that car doesn't need help rotating. So I would advise getting all your braking done in a straight line, get back to the power gradually, and let that amazing B58 engine just rocket you out of the corners. There will be people, of course, who will say, oh my God, though, it doesn't have a manual gearbox, and how can you recommend a track day car that doesn't have a manual gearbox? And for you guys, I will say, yeah, I'm a bit bummed out that it doesn't come with a manual, and if you really need a manual in your life, but you want a fast, like what I would call advanced driver sports car for the track, then I would say look at a C7 Grand Sport. I know it's not a brand new car. I guess I could say look at the C8, but I haven't tried one yet, so I can't recommend that. I'm sure they're very good, but I really enjoyed Jack's C7 Grand Sport Corvette that we tried. Jack's from Savage Geese's YouTube channel, and I think as a track day car and as an all-around road car, it's a really compelling package. It's got the wide body of the Z06, the big wheel and tires of the Z06, the suspension of the Z06. I think it's got the brakes of the Z06 too, but with that LT1 naturally aspirated engine that you get in the Z51 package, so it's like 460 horsepower instead of that like insane 650 supercharged motor that you don't need and is frankly going to get you in trouble more often than not. So I would say, yeah, if you need a manual, go for that 7-speed manual in the C7 Grand Sport. It's an incredible package. Before I tell you what I consider my favorite track test of all time, maybe what the best track car I've ever personally driven is, why don't we touch on the unlimited budget, like fantasy track day car options. There's obviously a ton of interesting cars to play with in that space. Everything from McLaren 720Ss, which I think are widely considered pretty much the fastest car money can buy these days. Obviously things like 911 GT3s, Cayman GT4s. There's tons of really compelling track day cars out there that you can buy if you've got oil chic levels of money. But for me, I think of all the cool stuff I've tried, and I've tried some pretty great stuff like Audi R8 V10 Pluses, 911 turbos and GT3s. I think the most exciting and maybe the most compelling track day car I've ever tried is Mr. Goose's Ariel Atom 3S, which is an insane car. It's an exoskeleton of a car with a Honda K24 that's turbocharged in the back of it. Makes like 365 horsepower. The thing weighs under 1,500 pounds. But man, was it ever traction limited. It runs on a relatively small wheel and tire package. It's like a 205/15 in the front and I think a 245/16 in the rear. And it's a Toyo R888 tire from the factory in Virginia. These are Ariel Adams North American spec cars as he bought, and man, it did not have a lot of grip. I'm not sure if that was a case of the car being so light that it couldn't put any temperature in the tire the day I tested it at TMP, or if it was more of a case of maybe it being oversprung, so it wasn't able to use the tire well at that track, which is rather bumpy, or if it's just the wrong compound, the wrong tire compound for that car at that track. I think Goose did actually swap on some Hoosiers later that same weekend that I tested it, and he did go quite a bit faster and said the car was a lot more stable, a lot more like confidence inspiring. So I suspect with a stickier set of tires on there, it would be a lot quicker than it was when I tested it. I only did like a 120 flat, which is not crazy fast, but my God, what an engaging driving experience. Obviously, when you're out in the open like that, you hear and see things that you wouldn't in a normal, closed-in car. You can see the front wheels turning out in front of you. You hear the engine and the blow-off valve and everything. Wastegates are right behind you. It's a truly all-encompassing, sensory overload type of experience. And because it's so traction limited, but so incredibly fast in a straight line, it really challenges you as a driver to keep it in a straight line as soon as you get into the braking zones. You'd get on the brake pedal, it would want to try to swap ends. You'd get it in a corner, it would want to try to swap ends even more. So there's a lot of steering input, a lot of pedal input. It is the definition of driver involvement. And for that, I applaud Mr. Goose for having the balls and the gumption and the wallet to go and buy one of those things, because they ain't cheap. That thing is like 95 grand starting price US dollars. So it's not for the faint of heart, but my God, it delivers hypercar levels of performance. It'll do 0 to 60 in 2.7 seconds, I believe. Quarter mile in like 10.7 seconds. 0 to 100 miles an hour in like 6.7 seconds. This is all hypercar levels of performance for a quarter or half the cost of other hypercars. So it does offer tremendous bang for the buck. As for what I personally consider the best track car I've ever tried, I've tried some pretty great stuff over the years. And I have to say that second on my list would be Tyler's NA1 NSX. Not because it was that fast. I think I did around a 120 flat in it again, but just because it's such a special driving experience. But head and shoulders above that car and really everything else I've ever tried around TMP has got to be On Point Dyno's Nissan 350Z. That is a truly like pro level race car. Sash has competed in IMSA events with it, as well as doing lots of time attacks both locally and in the States. He set track records all over the place. He still holds the unlimited CSCS rear-wheel drive track record at TMP with I think about a 112.7, somewhere in that neighborhood, although I believe he's done 111s in testing. And as for me, I think I did a 113.8 in it or something like that, and that was just beginning to explore the limits, just starting to get the very advanced traction control system that he has in that car to kick in a little bit. But even though I wasn't really pushing it that hard, my God, what a driving experience that thing is. I mean, sequential gearbox, a VQ that revs to 9,000 RPM and makes something like 450 wheel horsepower. and a suspension and aero package that's just so well dialed. It feels like you can't go wrong. You couldn't possibly fall off the track in that car because it's just so confidence inspiring. It makes so much grip. It's so well balanced. You just feel more and more confident with every lap you turn. In fact, I just kept doing laps, for the pure joy of it. I wasn't even looking at the lap timer. It was just such an amazing experience to hear that motor scream, to bang those gears in that Quaife sequential, which he's since upgraded to an even more special X-Track, like magnesium cased gearbox. So I am super stoked to see what Sasha will do with that car. As a matter of fact, we're going to be at the racetrack with him very soon, where he's going to be testing with that new hybrid system on board. So stay tuned for an update very soon on our channel about that. And that is a wrap on this episode, everyone. I hope you enjoyed what I consider to be the best budget and beginner-friendly track day car options, as well as more advanced and, say, bigger budget track day car options are out there. And be sure to let us know in the comments what you would consider to be the best options for beginners and advanced drivers, and for guys on a budget and guys with big wallet turbos.